This is Chris Young, and this is my podcast, Gotham and the Sacred. We live in a strange moment. By almost every measure, belief in God remains widespread. Churches still stand, sacred language still circulates. Moral claims are made constantly. And yet, something has collapsed. Not belief, but authority. Not faith, but function. This is Gotham and the Sacred. This is a podcast about philosophy, theology, ethics, and government, and about what happens when the sacred survives only as sentiment, but no longer orders our lives, restrains our power, or binds us one to another. This season, we explore a condition we call functional fatality, a world in which God is still spoken of, but no longer obeyed. God is invoked, but not feared, consumed, but not authoritative. We will ask uncomfortable questions. Can democracy survive without moral limits it did not create? Does capitalism depend on virtues it quietly erodes? Why do institutions fail when belief remains strong? And what replaces the sacred when it no longer binds? This is not a podcast about nostalgia or history. It is not a cultural war, and it is not easy answers. It is a serious conversation for a serious age. Welcome to Gotham and the Sacred. This is episode number 6, titled Why Secularization Was the Wrong Diagnosis. For decades, scholars told us a simple story. Modern societies become secular. And when modern societies become secular, belief declines and religion fades away. Some may even think, if they not pay close attention enough to what I said, that I might be agreeing, which I am not. And to say that again, when modern societies become secular, many believed that belief would decline and religion fades away. Over the past many podcasts, I've been making an argument, sharing many of the philosophers. I am not agreeing with that. I am not suggesting that as society becomes secular, belief declines and religion fades away. What I am arguing is that the moral authority of the sacred, of religion, or of God goes away. I don't disagree that maybe there's a little bit of secularization that is evident in society today, but I think, and so many others agree that I've talked about already, that the change is more subtle, but the change is probably more devastating. Belief did not disappear. The authority of the sacred disappeared. So in this episode of Gotham and the Sacred, I examined why secularization theory misdiagnosed this thing we call the modern condition. Why highly religious societies can still experience moral fragmentation, institutional decay, and political extremism. Drawing on modern thinkers such as Charles Taylor, or Peter Berger, or Alasdair MacIntyre, once again, this episode argues that the real problem is not the loss of belief, but the loss of the sacred's authority to bind behavior. This is not the death of God. It is something quieter, something more dangerous. And we will explore that in this podcast. This is Gotham and the Sacred. For most of the 20th century, social scientists were confident that they understood the trajectory of modernity. As societies became wealthier, more educated, and more technologically advanced, religion would decline, went the argument. God would retreat from the public sphere, went the argument. And moral authority would be replaced by rational administration. This was, by definition, the secularization theory. So the secularization theory is a theory founded primarily in sociology and philosophy that argues that as societies modernize, religion declines in social significance, authority, and influence. The basic claim is that the processes like scientific advancement, industrialization, urbanization, rationalization gradually push religion out of the center of public life and into a public sphere. But this theory was wrong, especially in the United States. Not partially wrong, structurally wrong, because it misunderstood what religion does in a society. Secularization clearly misunderstood what religion does in a society. Secularization theory treated religion as a belief system. Therefore, if beliefs decline, they argued religion declines. If belief persists, religion persists. But religion is not merely belief. Religion is also authority. Authority answers the following questions that belief alone cannot. For instance, who may command obedience? What limits power? Why should I restrain myself when no one is watching? By focusing on belief frequency, such as the number of times a person attends church, rather than moral function, secularization theory mistook the symptoms for the disease. Consider the empirical paradox. In the United States, roughly 80 to 90% of adults continue to affirm belief in God. A majority still describe themselves as religious. Sacred language remains politically potent, and yet, trust in institutions has fallen from majority confidence in the late 1960s to historic lows today, across government, media, churches, and the courts. Surveys consistently show growing agreement with statements like, right and wrong depend on the circumstances. Political polarization, measured by ideological distance and effective hostility, has more than doubled since the 1990s. If secularization were the correct diagnosis, these trends would not coexist, but they do. Because belief can survive, and it does survive, without moral authority. This shift that I'm explaining is best captured by Charles Taylor. Taylor argues that modern belief exists within what he calls an immanent frame. An immanent frame is a social space where belief is optional, revisable, and chosen. Accordingly, faith becomes an expression of ourselves, identity forming, personal, but it is no longer binding. God becomes someone you believe in. The sacred becomes something you believe in, not someone or something you answer to. This distinction matters. A belief you choose can always be unchosen, whereas authority structures society to do the right thing. The sociologist Peter Berger, one of secularization theory's earliest defenders, later admitted the theory had failed. Modernity did not produce unbelief. According to Berger, it produced pluralism. And pluralism does not destroy religion, it transforms it. It transformed the sacred. When belief, or when multiple belief systems coexist without a shared authority structure, belief ultimately becomes individualized, privatized, market-shaped. Religion survives, but it survives as a personal preference. Here is where the data sharpen our argument. Across the most advanced democracies today, democratic capitalist societies, we see a persistence in belief, a high persistence in belief, but we see low moral consensus. We see declining institutional legitimacy, rising moralized politics. This is not a coincidence. When sacred authority no longer binds, moral claims will indeed multiply, but no shared framework adjudicates them. When this happens, every disagreement escalates, because nothing stands above personal preference. This is why politics becomes apocalyptic, even in peaceful societies. This condition is precisely what Alasdair MacIntyre diagnosed, and I talked about MacIntyre multiple times in the previous episodes. MacIntyre argues that modern societies retain fragments of moral language, such as rights, justice, dignity, but lose the narrative unity that once gave these concepts coherence. We are left with the following. We have moral claims without the understanding of what grounds those claims. We have moral indignation without adjudication. We have conviction without authority. This therefore produces moral arguments, endless and endless moral arguments and little moral resolution. This explains a phenomenon that confounds secularization theory. Highly religious societies can be deeply unstable. Because when religion loses its binding authority, it does not disappear. It radicalizes. Sacred language migrates into politics. Identity movements, ideological absolutism. Do we see this today in the United States? Of course we do. Belief does not soften conflict. It intensifies it when detached from shared moral authority. This is why extremism often grows where belief remains strong, but institutional trust collapses. Take, for instance, this statistic. In the past 5 years, the number of domestic extremism, domestic terrorism attacks in the United States, or plots against government targets motivated by partisan beliefs, is nearly triple the number it was 25 years ago. In the mid-20th century, the two American political parties contained substantial ideological overlap. For instance, people were open to calling themselves liberal Republicans or conservative Democrats. Today, that overlap has largely disappeared. Americans are increasingly sorted ideologically into two parties, intensifying this notion of polarization. Another consequence of this shift is the therapeuticization of the sacred. I'll say that again. Therapeuticization of the sacred, which means we are providing therapy to the majority of society. And in that way, religion as a therapy becomes emotional support. It becomes about personal meaning, personal self-affirmation. In a sense, God heals, God validates, God comforts. But God no longer commands. This is not renewal. It is functional demotion. The sacred survives, but only insofar as it serves the individual's preference. What so many of us forget is that institutions depend on moral legitimacy. And I've spent 5 episodes explaining that. People obey not just because rules exist, but because they believe obedience is right. Therefore, when sacred authority collapses, institutions must compensate with procedure. Enforcement of law expands. Truth ultimately declines. Compliance replaces loyalty. This is why modern institutions feel simultaneously powerful and yet fragile. They can coerce, but they cannot inspire sacrifice. The problem modern societies face is not unbelief. It is belief without authority. I'll say that again. The problem modern societies face is not unbelief. It is belief without authority. Clearly, the sacred has not vanished. It has been disembedded from public moral order. This is why we clearly see belief persisting, morality fragmenting, politics radicalizing, institutions decaying. Secularization could not see this coming because it looked for disappearing belief instead of disappearing authority. Once we understand this problem, the next step becomes unavoidable. If belief without authority produces fragmentation, extremism, and institutional decay, then we must finally name the condition modern societies inhabit. The condition has a name. We call this functional fatality. God has not lost belief. The sacred has not lost belief. It has lost its ability to hold people accountable to their actions. Simply, the sacred has lost one important function that we are addressing, and that is the ability to function as the moral arbiter and adjudicator. People still care about religion and they still care about the sacred, but only insofar as it serves their own interest. When you ask a person who believes in the sacred, and you confront them on something that would hold them to a standard that is not in their interest, you often hear a rational argument trying everything to structure the argument in their favor. If the person cannot make a good argument in their favor, well, they may and probably will look to find another religion or another sacred doll from which to cling. I'll say that again because it's so important. The sacred has lost one important function that we are addressing here, and that is its ability to function as moral arbiter and adjudicator. People still care about religion and the sacred, but only insofar as it serves their own self-interest. When you ask a person who believes in the sacred and you confront them on something that would hold them to a standard that is not in their interest, you often hear a rational argument trying everything to structure the argument in their favor. If the person cannot make a good argument in their favor, well, they may and probably will look to find another religion or a sacred doll from which to cling. Meaning, we choose to find those institutions that agree with our personal preferences. And I'll leave it there for today. This is Gotham and the Sacred.